To our resident learner listening right now, you likely woke up today, checked the news, and, well, immediately braced yourself.
Oh, for sure.
It's like you put on your armor, you raised your shield, and you prepared to step out into the world. Because we are conditioned, almost from birth, to treat life like an active battlefield.
We really are.
Right. We anticipate the brutal commute traffic, the passive-aggressive emails from colleagues, the friction at the grocery store. It's just relentless economic pressures. We're constantly defending our territory and, our peace of mind.
It is a perpetual state of siege. And the psychological toll of treating daily existence as a continuous adversarial struggle is immense. We're operating in this chronic state of fight or flight, convinced that survival requires constant vigilant warfare.
Yeah.
Warfare against circumstances, against other people, and, sometimes even against our own bodies.
But what if that core assumption that life is this battle you have to fight, what if that's the fundamental error? What if the heavy armor you're strapping on every single morning is actually like a magnet?
A magnet drawing the very arrows you're trying so desperately to avoid.
Exactly, which flips the entire paradigm.
Right, because if the landscape we're standing on is not a battlefield, well, we have to fundamentally redefine the nature of the terrain. We have to ask what the rules of engagement actually are if engagement is in combat.
Which is the exact mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring the startling possibility that our everyday language, our casual self-deprecating jokes, our fleeting daydreams, and our silent expectations are secretly, meticulously orchestrating our physical reality.
It's a huge concept.
It is. And to unpack this, we're looking at the foundational work of a woman named Florence Scovel Shinn. We're pulling from her self-published 1925 classic, The Game of Life and How to Play It, her 1928 workbook, Your Word is Your Wand, and, some contextual history of her life and the fascinating era she was writing in.
Yeah, Shinn was a central figure in what became known as the New Thought movement. But her writing doesn't read like typical esoteric philosophy.
Not at all.
It's startlingly direct, almost mechanical, really. She presents rules for human consciousness that operate with the cold, reliable precision of physics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the central mind-bending premise of her entire body of work hits you right in the first chapter. She states, just flat out, that most people consider life a battle, but it is not a battle.
Right.
It's a game. Specifically, a game of giving and receiving. And the tragic irony is that most of us are running out onto the field playing it with a completely wrong, highly destructive rule book.
Yeah, and to understand why she conceptualized life as a game and how she managed to formulate these very specific rules, we have to look at the board she was playing on. So as we talk, I'm shifting the visual backdrop behind me to a bustling, sepia-toned 1920s New York City street scene.
Oh, wow. Yeah, look at that.
Notice the intense, rapid urbanization. You've got the Model T Fords navigating around horse-drawn carts, the massive steel architecture rising into the skyline.
It looks chaotic. Like there is a palpable sense of a world in absolute breathless motion.
It really was. It was an era of unprecedented transition and profound psychological dislocation. We cannot understand the mechanics of Shinn's philosophy without understanding the historical crucible that forged it.
Makes sense.
Because the atmosphere of the 1920s perfectly primed audiences for her specific practical message. This society was emerging from an unimaginable collective nightmare. They had just survived the mechanized slaughter of World War I, which completely shattered the illusion of human progress.
Right.
And immediately following that, the 1918 influenza pandemic swept the globe. It killed tens of millions and left shattered families in its wake.
The collective trauma must have been just staggering. You have a population realizing that a microscopic virus in the air or, a single political assassination across the ocean could literally upend or end their lives.
Completely out of their control.
The feeling of utter helplessness, of having zero agency over your own destiny would have been paralyzing.
Exactly. And in response to that profound helplessness, people were starved for anything, really, that offered a measure of personal mastery. They didn't want abstract theological debates about the afterlife.
No, they wanted practical help.
Right. Practical, consoling, spiritual ideas that gave them a sense of control in the here and now. And New York City, being the publishing and cultural capital, was the epicenter of this search. The 1920s also introduced massive economic whiplash.
Oh, yeah.
You have the Roaring Twenties credit boom, the explosion of mass speculation, and a consumer culture suddenly driven by a sophisticated new advertising industry.
So people are dealing with grief, existential dread, and suddenly they are bombarded with advertisements telling them they need to buy new appliances on credit to be happy.
It's a lot to process.
It is. They needed a framework to make sense of this booming, terrifying modern economy. I mean, how do I pay my rent in Manhattan is a very different spiritual question than, how do I achieve nirvana in a cave?
It requires a completely different metaphysical tool set. And the popular psychology of the era was beginning to provide fragments of that tool set. Shinn's ideas dovetailed with emerging psychological frameworks that were moving from the academic fringes into mainstream consciousness.
Like who?
Well, for instance, Émile Coué, a French psychologist, he toured the United States in 1922 and introduced the concept of autosuggestion.
Oh, he's the one famous for the mantra, every day in every way I'm getting better and better.
Yes, and it swept the nation. It wasn't framed as magic, though. It was framed as a psychological mechanism to bypass the critical mind.
Interesting.
And even before Coué, the great American philosopher and psychologist William James had spent time analyzing what he termed the mind cure movement. James legitimized the study of how mental habits, beliefs, and focused attention could directly influence physical and circumstantial reality.
So the idea that consciousness was an active, creative force rather than a passive observer was gaining serious intellectual traction.
Exactly. They were beginning to map the software of the human brain. But Florence Scovel Shinn wasn't a psychologist, and she wasn't a traditional religious cleric either.
No, she was a trained artist, which is so fascinating. She studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts.
This artistic background is crucial. She was married to Everett Shinn, a prominent painter in the Ashkin School. Now, the Ashkin School was famous for its gritty, unvarnished realism. They painted the dark slums, the crowded alleys, the depressing realities of urban poverty in New York.
That is such a wild contrast. I mean, she is living among artists who are dedicating their lives to documenting the depressing, inescapable reality of the physical world, while she's secretly developing a philosophy entirely based on ignoring that physical reality in order to manifest perfect ideals.
It is a striking dichotomy.
Yeah.
Her marriage to Everett actually ended in divorce in 1912. So here she is, a single woman in her 40s, carving out her own independent livelihood in early 20th century New York.
She really embodies the new woman ethos of the era.
She does, seeking professional autonomy, finding a public voice, and maintaining financial independence. She taught, she illustrated, and eventually she began giving metaphysical lectures.
But the establishment wasn't exactly rushing to hand her a microphone. When she wrote The Game of Life and How to Play It in 1925, she couldn't find a traditional publisher willing to touch it.
No, she had to self-publish. She took the ultimate gamble and bet on her own philosophy.
And that independence is heavily reflected in her writing style. There is no dense, verbose theology. Her tone is brisk, advisory, and highly pragmatic. She favored condensed exposition, short parables, and real-world case studies drawn directly from her clients.
Right.
But I do want to dig into how she actually wrote, though, because she relies heavily on biblical scripture. To a modern reader, pulling constant quotes from the Bible might make it sound like a traditional Sunday sermon, but her text reads nothing like Orthodox religion.
No, it really doesn't.
So was she basically taking the Bible and stripping it for parts to build a 1920s life hack manual?
That is a very accurate way to describe her methodology. In the broader New Thought tradition, which includes influential figures like Emma Curtis Hopkins and the founders of the Unity Movement scripture, was completely decoupled from rigid historical dogma.
Okay.
Shinn, like Hopkins, used biblical references as psychological metaphors and interpretive anchors.
So when she quotes Jesus saying, "By your words ye are justified, and by your words ye are condemned," she isn't talking about facing a judge at the gates of heaven and being sent to hell for swearing.
Not at all. She is describing a psychological mechanism. She treats the biblical concept of the word as a literal, vibratory, creative force in the present moment.
Ah, I see.
She takes the mystical imagery of traditional religion and aligns it with a modern ethos of personal agency and scientific experimentation. She essentially says, here is a psychological law encoded in this ancient text. Test it in your own life and watch the result.
Okay, so if the ancient texts are hiding the rule book and life is the game, we need to understand the playing field. But according to Shinn, this game isn't happening out on the streets or in the banks or in the hospitals. The entire game of life is played strictly within the confines of our own minds.
Yes. To play Shinn's game, you have to understand her specific topographical map of human consciousness. She divides the mind into three distinct, highly specialized departments.
Right, the conscious, the superconscious, and the subconscious.
Exactly.
Let's break these down because this three-part engine drives every single rule that follows. First, there's the conscious mind. She also refers to this as the mortal or carnal mind. This is the part of us that simply looks around and reports on what it sees.
It takes the physical world at face value.
Right.
It is the ultimate empiricist. The conscious mind observes the bank account balance and reports poverty. It feels a pain in the chest and reports impending death. It watches the news and reports a hostile, dangerous world. It is entirely bounded by current, limited conditions and appearances.
On the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, she places the superconscious mind. This is what she calls the God mind within each individual. She references Plato's realm of perfect ideas here.
Yes, the superconscious contains the divine design. Shinn writes, there is a place that you are to fill and no one else can fill, something you are to do, which no one else can do.
Wow.
This perfect pattern, this ultimate potential, exists perfectly intact within the superconscious. Occasionally it flashes across our conscious mind as a deep intuition, a sudden inspiration, or an ideal that feels almost too good to be true.
It's that fleeting moment where you suddenly envision yourself writing a novel or moving to a new city, and for a split second it feels incredibly real and right. Before the conscious mind steps in and says, don't be ridiculous, you don't have the money or the talent.
Precisely. The conscious mind immediately acts as a skeptic, trying to kill the superconscious ideal.
Yeah.
But the true battleground, the intermediary where the game is actually won or lost, is the third department.
The subconscious mind.
Yeah.
Our sources describe the subconscious mind as raw power, utterly devoid of direction. I mean, think about the engine room of a massive steam locomotive, or the foundational electrical grid of a major city.
That's a great visual.
It contains immense, unfathomable kinetic energy, but it has absolutely no steering wheel, no brakes, and crucially, no moral compass. It doesn't judge, it doesn't analyze, and it doesn't care if the train is headed for a beautiful mountain station or straight off a cliff.
Right. It simply shovels coal into whatever furnace you open. That analogy captures Shinn's warning perfectly. She states explicitly that the subconscious has no power of induction. It cannot reason.
It only knows how to follow orders.
Exactly. Whatever a person feels deeply or images clearly is impressed upon the subconscious mind and carried out in the minutest detail in the physical world.
Which introduces what she calls the imaging faculty. Shinn refers to the imagination as the scissors of the mind.
And the picture she paints is vivid and genuinely unsettling. The imagination is ever cutting, day by day, the pictures we hold in our minds. And sooner or later, we meet our own mental creations in the outer physical world.
The case studies she provides to illustrate this are not lighthearted at all. They demonstrate the absolute lethal danger of an untrained imagination.
Consider the anecdote about the man who feared a specific rare disease.
Oh, this story stuck with me. Because it wasn't a common illness, it was something highly unusual and difficult to contract. But his conscious mind became fascinated and terrified by it.
He read about it constantly, he obsessed over the symptoms, he visualized what it would feel like to have it.
He was continually handing the scissors of his imagination a highly detailed, emotionally charged blueprint of this specific illness.
And remember the rule of the subconscious. It does not judge. It does not say, well, this disease will cause my host immense suffering and death, so I should reject this blueprint. The subconscious simply said, you are giving me clear instructions and fueling them with intense emotional energy. I will execute the order.
And it went to work, manifested the rare disease in his physical body, and the man died.
Literally died.
Shinn literally calls him the victim of distorted imagination. He weaponized the immense power of his own subconscious engine against his own biology.
It is a stark warning about where we place our attention. But there is another story in the text that is even more insidious because it begins as innocent child's play.
Oh, the little girl.
Yes, she describes a woman who, as a little girl, loved to play make-believe. But her favorite character to play wasn't a princess or an explorer.
No, she liked to pretend she was a widow.
She would dress up in black clothes, drape a long, black sweeping veil over her face, and walk around the house mourning a fictional dead husband.
And the adults around her thought it was charming. They praised her for being dramatic and amusing.
To the conscious minds of the adults, it was harmless theater. But the subconscious does not understand the concept of a joke. It does not comprehend pretend.
The text notes that this little girl eventually grew up and married a man she loved deeply. But shortly after the wedding, he died.
It's heartbreaking.
And she spent years wearing black clothes and a sweeping veil in actual waking reality. The subconscious had taken the blueprint of the widow, held onto it for decades, and the moment she was married, it executed the pattern it had been given.
Completely indifferent to the devastating real-world grief it caused. If we pull back and look at the psychological implications of this for a modern listener, it demands a radical audit of our internal lives.
Yeah, how often do we vividly visualize worst-case scenarios and mask it as being pragmatic?
Oh, all the time. We picture the upcoming job interview going horribly wrong, imagining the interviewer's sneer. We rehearse arguments in the shower with our partners, literally feeling the anger and adrenaline before a single word has been spoken in reality.
We think we are just preparing ourselves for disappointment. But under Shinn's framework, there is no such thing as harmless preparation.
You are actively engaged in creation.
You are taking the scissors of your mind, cutting out a pattern of failure or conflict, and handing it directly to a builder who takes you entirely literally. It forces you to look at your own anxiety not just as an unpleasant feeling, but as a dangerous creative act.
It requires a terrifying level of mental discipline, which leads us to the next logical question. If the imagination is cutting the pattern, what is the mechanism that finalizes the order? How do we unwittingly hit send on these blueprints?
According to Shinn, the primary trigger is intensely physical. It is our vocal cords.
The spoken word. Shinn insists that the subconscious mind has zero sense of humor. When you speak, the universe takes you at your literal word.
She uses a very apt technological metaphor for the 1920s, right? The phonograph record.
Yes. She viewed words as actual vibratory forces that physically impact the environment. Every word you speak is stamped indelibly upon the subconscious, just like a needle cutting a groove into the sensitive wax disc of a phonograph.
Like if the singer coughs, the cough is reported forever.
Exactly. If you speak words of lack, limitation, or sickness, you are permanently recording those conditions into your subconscious, and that record will play on a loop in your reality until you consciously smash it.
And people carelessly joke themselves into absolute ruin. The text is full of these dark, cautionary tales. There is the story of the woman who used to have a beautiful home, plenty of money, a comfortable life, but she grew exhausted by the endless management of the large household.
She started complaining to anyone who would listen.
Yeah, she would sigh and say, "I'm sick and tired of things. I wish I lived in a trunk."
She thought she was just expressing a fleeting frustration. She was using a figure of speech.
But the subconscious doesn't understand figures of speech. By the time Shinn actually met this woman, her entire life had collapsed. She had lost the house, lost the money, and was literally living out of a single trunk in a small room.
It's just wild.
She had repeatedly spoken the command, and the subconscious flawlessly engineered the circumstances to fulfill it.
There is a similar anecdote about a wealthy woman who used to joke continually about getting ready for the poorhouse.
Oh, that was her favorite running gag, right?
Yeah. Whenever she spent money, she would laugh and say she was heading for the poorhouse. Within a few years, she lost her fortune and was almost destitute.
Wow.
She'd impressed the subconscious with a clear, repeated verbal picture of lack, and the subconscious obediently manifested poverty.
It is like walking around with an incredibly loyal, literal genie that never sleeps, constantly granting wishes you don't actually want.
That's exactly what it is.
And it applies to the mundane daily frustrations, too. Shinn talks about a family where the daughter always affirmed, "I always catch a car," meaning the streetcar. She expected it, she spoke it, and the streetcar would invariably arrive just as she reached the stop.
But her father was the opposite.
He always complained, "I always miss a car, it pulls out just as I arrive." And that became his unbreakable reality. They were standing at the exact same street corner, but they had spoken two entirely different laws of physics into existence for themselves.
What is particularly fascinating is how Shinn applies this strict rule to our social rituals. She tackles the concept of the old-fashioned chat.
Oh, the complaining session.
Yes. She describes a friend who received an invitation to come over for a fine old-fashioned chat. The friend immediately refused the invitation. Why? Because she knew from experience that an old-fashioned chat usually devolves into an hour of sharing stories about loss, lack, failure, sickness, and town gossip.
The classic venting session, we all do it. You grab a coffee with a friend and the immediate bonding mechanism is shared grievance.
We complain about our bosses, the economy, our mysterious back pain. We think we're just blowing off steam and seeking empathy.
But from Shinn's perspective, you are not blowing off steam. You are engaging in an hour-long session of destructive programming.
You are sitting there, willingly stamping negative records into your subconscious phonograph. She quotes the biblical proverb, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue."
And she means it literally.
Literally. If you spend an hour talking passionately about disease and poverty with a friend, you are actively inviting disease and poverty into your physical space. You simply cannot afford the luxury of a destructive conversation.
Okay, I have to step in and push back here.
Huh.
Because reading this, well, it borders on paranoia.
It does sound like a lot of pressure.
If every single word I say is a literal command, I would be terrified to open my mouth. What if I make a sarcastic joke? What if I slip up and say, "I'm dying of hunger"? Does this mean people who use Lucky Charms or objects are actually protecting themselves, or are they just speaking more spells? Does she believe in the power of a rabbit's foot to ward off a bad word?
It is a crucial distinction to make. Shinn does not believe that inanimate objects inherently possess magical power, but she astutely recognizes their psychological utility.
Okay.
She contrasts two stories to explain how the human mind interacts with objects. First, she discusses two highly successful businessmen in her class whose fortunes suddenly plummeted. Their businesses went to smash. Well, Shinn investigated and discovered they had both recently purchased lucky monkeys, small talismans, and they had begun relying on these trinkets for their continued success, rather than their faith in the divine mind.
So they outsource their internal power to a piece of carved wood.
Yes, they gave the power to the object. Shinn told them to take the lucky monkeys and throw them down a coal hole.
Just throw them away.
She instructed them to return their reliance entirely to the one true power within. They destroyed the talismans, realigned their mindset, and their businesses miraculously recovered.
Wow.
But she juxtaposes this with a seemingly contradictory story. A woman who was in deep, paralyzing despair was crossing the street one day and found a horseshoe.
A horseshoe.
Immediately, the woman was filled with joy and hope. She felt God had sent the horseshoe as a sign to keep up her courage. That moment of hope blossomed into profound faith, and she shortly experienced a massive breakthrough in her life.
Wait, why is the monkey a dangerous idol, but the horseshoe is a divine catalyst? They are both just inanimate objects.
The difference lies entirely in the psychological mechanism. Shinn explains that the horseshoe itself had zero power to change the woman's life.
Right.
The power resided solely in the woman's subconscious connection to the divine. However, the object acted as a psychological trigger. Finding the horseshoe successfully bypassed her conscious despair and triggered an intense, genuine feeling of expectancy within her subconscious.
Oh, it shifted her internal state from fear to faith.
Exactly. The placebo doesn't cure the illness. The mind's profound belief in the placebo cures the illness. The danger only arises when you believe the object is the power, rather than recognizing it as a tool that merely adjusted your own mental state.
That makes perfect psychological sense. It's a mechanism for state change. But this brings us to a massive dilemma in Shinn's framework.
What's that?
If our words and our imagination are this unimaginably powerful, how do we know what to actually ask for? I mean, if I can get whatever I demand, there is a terrifying possibility that I will demand the wrong thing and ruin my life.
This brings us to a concept Shinn calls the law of substitution and divine selection. Notice the visual behind me has shifted. We are no longer on the chaotic, striving streets of New York. We are now in a serene, perfectly ordered, vast library.
It feels incredibly peaceful. There is no anxiety, no hustle.
Because in this realm, striving is obsolete. Shinn argued that one of the primary sources of human misery is our insistence on forcing things that do not belong to us by divine right.
We do try to force things a lot.
She writes that most people are completely ignorant of their true destinies. Driven by the limited conscious mind, they strive desperately for specific situations, specific jobs, or specific people that would actually bring them profound dissatisfaction and failure if they managed to acquire them.
We have all experienced that, the agonizing desperation of wanting a specific promotion or a specific house or, most universally, a specific person to fall in love with us. And Shinn tells a brilliant story about this exact scenario. A woman comes to her, completely consumed by her love for a man the text refers to as AB. The woman demands that Shinn use her metaphysical power to speak the word for AB to marry her.
She essentially wants to use spiritual laws to cast a love spell.
Exactly. And Shinn's reaction is highly instructive. She flatly refuses. She explains to the woman that using mental power to coerce another person's will or to force a specific outcome dictated by the carnal mind is a direct violation of spiritual law. It is metaphysical trespass.
Right.
Instead, Shinn tells her, I will not speak the word for AB. I will speak the word for the right man, the divine selection, the man who belongs to you by divine right.
Then she offers this airtight psychological logic. She says, if AB is the right man, you can't possibly lose him. And if he isn't the right man, you will receive his equivalent.
It is the ultimate exercise in emotional detachment. You are allowed to maintain the desire for a loving relationship, but you must completely detach from the specific vehicle of that love.
Exactly. And the psychological relief of that detachment is profound. The woman agrees to this substitution. She continues to see AB, but she stops trying to force the relationship.
And what happens?
A week later, she returns to Shinn and admits, suddenly AB just doesn't seem that wonderful to me anymore.
The obsessive illusion had broken.
Yes. Shortly after that, she meets an entirely different man. This new man immediately falls in love with her, declares she is his ideal, and says all the exact things she had spent months agonizingly wishing AB would say. She completely lost interest in AB and found a relationship that flowed naturally and happily.
I love that concept. To use a modern analogy, here's where it gets really interesting. It is like you finally get a table at a world-class Michelin star restaurant. You sit down, the waiter approaches, and instead of looking at the menu or trusting the acclaimed chef, you start slamming your fists on the table, screaming that you want a lukewarm gas station hot dog.
That is exactly what we do.
You are aggressively demanding a low-quality outcome simply because it is the only food your limited conscious mind is familiar with. Shinn is telling us to stop demanding the hot dog, tell the universe you are hungry for a spectacular meal, and then sit back and trust the master chef to bring you their signature dish. It might be a Wagyu steak you didn't even possess the vocabulary to ask for. That is divine selection.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the limitation of the conscious mind. When you demand the specific, you are putting boundaries on the infinite. When you ask for the divine selection, you are opening your subconscious to possibilities that your conscious mind literally hasn't conceived of yet.
But as with all of Shinn's teachings, understanding this intellectually is insufficient. How do you actually prove to your subconscious that you believe the master chef is cooking your meal, especially when your table is empty and you are starving?
Which brings us to the law of prosperity, or what Shinn famously calls digging your ditches. Because trusting the divine selection is easy when you are comfortable. But what about when you are facing an absolute crisis? Shinn states that passive hope is useless. You must demonstrate active faith. You have to physically act as if you have already received what you asked for, even when there is zero evidence of it.
This is perhaps her most challenging and most psychosomatic directive. Expectancy cannot merely be a thought in your head. It must be a behavior embodied by your physical actions. You must prepare for the thing you have asked for when there isn't the slightest sign of it in sight.
The stories she uses to illustrate this principle are wild, high-stakes thrillers.
They really are.
A woman comes to Shinn in an absolute panic. She is going to be sued for $3,000 on the 15th of the month. She does not have the money. She has exhausted all avenues. She is facing financial ruin and public humiliation.
A total nightmare.
Shinn calmly tells her that God is her supply, speaks the word for the money to appear, and instructs the woman to maintain perfect faith. While the 15th arrives, it is a Saturday, and the woman's bank account is still empty.
Oh man, the woman must have been terrified.
She calls Shinn terrified, and Shinn's response is a masterclass in behavioral intervention. She first notes a practical detail. Courts are closed on Saturdays, so she cannot actually be sued that day.
True.
But then she gives a bizarre instruction. She tells the woman, your part is to act rich. She invites the woman to meet her for an expensive lunch at a nice restaurant, instructing her to behave exactly as she would if the $3,000 were already sitting safely in her bank account.
Which sounds completely unhinged. You're about to be sued for debt, so you go buy an expensive lunch.
But the woman actually does it. She forces herself to act rich, enjoying the lunch, keeping her courage and conversation elevated.
And the payoff is cinematic.
It is. That evening, the woman is at home. Her doorbell rings. Her maid looks out the window and says, it's your cousin with the long white beard.
This is so specific.
The woman is so stressed, she almost tells a maid to send him away, but at the last second decides to receive him. He comes in, chaps casually for an hour, and as he is walking out the door, he turns and says, by the way, how are your finances?
She admits she is in a bind, and he says, I will give you $3,000 the first of the month.
But the first of the month is too late. She needs the money immediately to avoid the lawsuit on Monday morning. So she confesses she is about to be sued.
And the cousin says, oh, in that case, I will give you the check tomorrow morning.
The crisis is entirely averted literally at the 11th hour because the woman refused to physically embody the posture of a victim of poverty. She prepared her nervous system for prosperity.
She has another example that is less dramatic but equally illustrative. A woman is desperately trying to find an apartment in New York during a severe housing shortage. There are hundreds of applicants for every available unit.
It seems mathematically impossible.
Her friends are practically begging her to give up and put her furniture in storage, but the woman refuses. She speaks the word for the right apartment, and then she walks into a store and buys brand new blankets for the apartment she does not have.
Her rational mind was likely screaming, "Do not spend money on blankets, you have nowhere to put them."
Exactly. But she bought them anyway to dig her ditches. And miraculously, shortly after, she secures a beautiful apartment, beating out 200 other applicants. The blankets were the physical manifestation of active faith.
And we must explain where Shinn gets this phrase. Digging ditches comes from a story in the Book of Kings.
Right, the three kings in the desert.
3 kings are leading their armies through a scorching desert. They run out of water. The men and the horses are dying of thirst. They consult the prophet Elisha, who delivers a strange message. Thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches.
He tells them they will not see wind and they will not see rain, but the valley will be filled with water.
Exactly. They had to dig the ditches in the dry, burning sand first. They had to exert exhausting physical effort to prepare for the water before a single cloud appeared in the sky.
From a psychological standpoint, what is happening here? When the woman buys the blankets or the woman goes to the expensive lunch, they are using physical action to break the subconscious loop of anxiety.
Anxiety is an open stress cycle in the nervous system. By acting as if the problem is already solved, you force the nervous system to relax into a state of completion.
When that woman walked into apartment interviews after buying the blankets, she wasn't radiating desperation. She was radiating calm expectancy. Landlords subconsciously pick up on that confidence, giving her the edge over 200 panicked applicants.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to push back hard here, though, because I can hear a modern listener taking this advice and completely destroying their life.
How so?
Well, if I want to be a millionaire, should I just go out tomorrow, max out all my credit cards, buy a Ferrari, and stay at a 5-star hotel to act rich and dig ditches? If the universe responds to my actions, shouldn't reckless spending force the universe to make me rich? This sounds like a fast track to absolute bankruptcy. How does Shinn differentiate between active faith and manic, ego-driven, financial self-destruction?
It is a critical pushback, and Shinn is very careful to address this exact trap through the concept of intuition. Attempting to force an outcome by maxing out credit cards from a place of desperate greed or ego is not digging ditches.
It's not.
No, it is the carnal, conscious mind trying to manipulate spiritual law. True action, the kind that successfully triggers the subconscious, must be guided entirely by intuition, what Shinn colloquially calls the hunch.
But calling it a hunch feels like a massive loophole. If it works out, you call it a divine hunch. If it bankrupts you, you say it was just your ego. How does she actually tell her readers to distinguish a genuine intuition from a desperate impulse?
The distinction lies in the somatic experience, how it actually feels in the body. An impulse driven by ego or desperation is accompanied by a frantic, anxious, rushing energy. It feels tight.
Okay.
A genuine intuition, the hunch, drops in with a profound sense of calm, undeniable knowing, even if the action itself seems illogical. She illustrates this with a woman who was destitute in New York down to her last $8.
$8.
She came to Shinn for a prosperity treatment. Shinn didn't tell her to go spend the $8 on a fancy lunch. She told her to get quiet and follow her intuition. The woman got quiet and said she had a sudden, overwhelming hunch to take a train back to her distant hometown.
Which is wildly illogical. I mean, rationality would say, you only have $8 for car fare. Stay in New York, walk the streets, and aggressively look for a job.
But Shinn told her never to violate a clear hunch. The action wasn't driven by a desire to show off. It was a calm, internal directive. The woman bought the train ticket, went home, bumped into an old friend, and through that connection received thousands of dollars in a completely unexpected way.
The action must follow the intuitive guidance, not the conscious mind's frantic desire to construct a shortcut.
Precisely.
So it is about authentic internal alignment, not faking it till you make it. When you buy the blankets, it has to stem from a place of deep, sudden peace, not from a frantic attempt to trick the universe.
That's right.
But speaking of frantic attempts, this transitions us perfectly to what happens when things go actively, aggressively wrong.
Yes.
You've guarded your words, you've dug your ditches, you've followed your hunches, but then someone intentionally attacks you. A colleague tries to sabotage your career. A competitor tries to steal your business.
It happens.
Shinn's advice here is arguably the most counterintuitive, difficult pill to swallow in her entire philosophy. She says, when faced with active malice, stop fighting back completely.
Resist, not evil. It is a foundational concept in her work, derived directly from the Sermon on the Mount. But she strips away the moralizing and explains the cold metaphysics behind it.
How does she explain it?
Shinn views evil not as a dark, opposing force, but as an illusion. She invokes Maya, the Eastern concept of illusion. She argues that evil only appears to exist because humanity has fallen into the trap of believing in two powers, good and evil.
Yeah.
If you truly believe that the infinite, or God, is the only actual power in the universe, then evil can have no real substance. It is merely a shadow created by a lack of light.
But metaphysically calling it a shadow doesn't help when someone is actively trying to get you fired. It doesn't feel like an illusion. It feels incredibly solid, and your instinct is to fight back, to defend yourself, to destroy their credibility before they destroy yours.
It feels solid to the conscious mind. But Shinn states that resistance is hell. She means that literally, when you resist a situation, you are granting it reality. You are affirming that it has power over you.
So by fighting, you make it real.
And by engaging in the fight, you actually magnetize yourself to the very thing you fear. As she powerfully writes, so long as man resists a situation, he will have it with him. If he runs away from it, it will run after him.
If you run away from a situation, it will run after you. That is hauntingly true. I mean, how many people quit a job because they have a micromanaging toxic boss only to start a new job in a completely different industry and find an identical toxic boss waiting for them?
It happens constantly because they haven't resolved the internal resistance. They are carrying the blueprint of the toxic boss in their subconscious, and their fear reconstructs the dynamic wherever they go.
Shinn provides a brilliant case study of overcoming this with a machinery salesman, right?
Yes. This salesman was on the verge of closing a massive deal. But a rival suddenly appeared on the scene with what was claimed to be a vastly superior machine. The salesman was consumed by terror of defeat.
Naturally, his livelihood, his commission, his pride are all on the line. Most people in that scenario would start frantically undercutting the competitor, bad-mouthing the rival machine to the buyer, and stressing themselves into an ulcer.
But Shinn told him to wipe out all fear, to recognize that his supply came from the divine and couldn't be stolen. And most shockingly, she instructed him to actively bless his rival. She demanded he hold not a single critical or competitive thought toward the man.
Bless the guy actively trying to steal your commission. The level of mental discipline required to genuinely wish success upon your enemy is staggering.
It is the ultimate test of the philosophy. But the salesman did it. He managed to drop his resistance. He went into the final meeting fearless, totally non-resistant, and internally blessing the other man.
And what was the outcome?
The rival's machine suddenly refused to work. It inexplicably broke down during the demonstration, and Shinn's salesman sold his machine without the slightest difficulty.
Come on, are we really supposed to believe that his internal blessing literally, physically broke the cogs in the other man's machine, or is this just massive confirmation bias?
Well, Shinn would argue that goodwill produces a literal, vibratory aura of protection. If you bless a person, you rob them of their energetic ammunition. They have no power to harm you, and the physical circumstances rearrange themselves to reflect that lack of power.
Interesting.
But whether you view it as mystical intervention or just psychological grounding, the result is the same. The salesman didn't project nervous, desperate energy to the buyer. He was calm.
And she applies this non-resistance to inanimate objects and situations, too. She has this concept of baptizing events. She advises that whenever a failure or a crisis occurs, you should immediately baptize it as a success in your mind.
Yes. She shares a story of her own regarding a phone call. She was waiting for an extremely important call. As time dragged on, she started getting impatient, tense, and anxious.
She was resisting the delay.
She was trying to mentally force the timeline. And because of her intense inner friction, the phone line literally went dead. A complete disconnection.
Her anxiety broke the telephone.
In her framework, yes, the external mechanical failure was a direct mirror of her internal tension. But instead of throwing a tantrum and spiraling into more resistance, she recognized what she had done.
She immediately stopped fighting.
She blessed the broken foe. She baptized the situation as a success, affirming that she could not possibly lose any communication that belonged to her by divine right. She surrendered the battle.
And what happened?
Within minutes, a friend who happened to be visiting rushed out to a crowded grocery store, managed to get the phone company to reconnect the line against all odds, and Shinn received her important call. When she surrendered the resistance, the problem solved itself.
The psychological takeaway here is profound. Facing a situation fearlessly makes it fall away of its own weight. If you are dealing with a nightmare landlord, a hostile mother-in-law, or a stressful project, your primal instinct is to brace for impact.
But Shinn is telling you to drop your shield.
Bless the landlord. Baptize the terrifying project as a massive success. It completely shifts your physiological state, moving you from panic to flow. Which bridges us to the final, most radical application of her work. Because this idea of blessing your enemies leads directly to Shinn's ultimate mechanism for physical healing, the law of love and forgiveness.
This is where all the preceding laws culminate. Guarding your words, digging your ditches, and practicing non-resistance all point toward this apex. And here, Shinn tackles one of the heaviest metaphysical concepts in existence: karma.
The law of cause and effect.
Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap.
Which sounds incredibly unforgiving. If the subconscious has been recording my negative words and fears for 30 years, and the law of karma dictates that I must reap what I've sown, am I just doomed? Do I have to suffer through decades of the bad blueprints I unwittingly handed over?
Shinn acknowledges that the law of karma is the baseline rule of the physical game. However, she introduces a revolutionary caveat.
What's the caveat?
She argues that Christianity introduced a higher spiritual law that completely supersedes the Eastern concept of karma. She calls this the law of forgiveness, or the law of grace. She asserts that through radical forgiveness, you can actually hack the system.
Hack the system.
You can cancel out karma and neutralize your past mistakes. Under grace, you are not eternally bound to the negative seeds you planted, provided you can genuinely forgive others and forgive yourself.
And this isn't just about achieving spiritual peace of mind. She ties this concept of grace directly and literally to physical health. This was incredibly radical for the 1920s. She essentially presents a fully psychosomatic view of medicine. She asserts that almost all physical sickness originates from a violation of the law of love.
Her diagnostics read like psychological poetry. She states that unforgiveness, resentment, and continual criticism cause unnatural, toxic deposits in the blood, which eventually manifest as rheumatism and hardened arteries.
Wow.
She claims that false growths, like tumors, are the physical calcification of jealousy, hatred, and fear. Every disease is quite literally a disease, a mind not at rest. Therefore, to heal the physical body, you cannot just treat the symptom. You must first heal the soul by rooting out the toxic thought pattern.
The anecdotes she provides to support this are some of the most striking in the entire text. There is the story of a stage actress who had developed a terrible, disfiguring skin disease.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
The medical doctors told her it was entirely incurable. She was losing her beauty, losing her career, and slipping into despair. She came to Shinn for help, and through their sessions, they discovered the root cause.
Unforgiveness.
Yes. The actress was harboring a deep, venomous, obsessive hatred toward a male co-star who had been jealous of her talent and had successfully conspired to get her fired from a major production.
The physical skin disease was merely the outer manifestation of her internal resentment. It was the toxic emotion outpicturing on her literal skin.
So the actress realizes this, and she doesn't just say, okay, I forgive him. She has to do the grueling internal work.
It is work.
She spends hours alone in the silence, crying out, oh God, don't let me hate that man. She works on her own mind relentlessly until she finally reaches a state of deep, genuine peace and forgiveness toward the man who ruined her career.
And the result. According to Shinn, the incurable skin disease completely vanished in 3 days.
3 days.
By wiping out the internal resentment, the physical symptom lost its structural foundation and collapsed.
It is a phenomenal claim, but it perfectly encapsulates her core thesis, as the within, so the without. And there is another story she tells that captures her somewhat humorous, highly direct bedside manner when dealing with people who refuse to acknowledge their own internal toxicity.
Oh, the oyster story.
Yes, the oyster story. It is the most memorable interaction in the book. A woman comes to Shinn claiming she is terribly physically ill because she ate a poisoned oyster.
And Shinn, fully aware of the woman's combative personality, looks at her and retorts, "Oh no, the oyster was harmless. You poisoned the oyster.
Oh,
What's the matter with you?"
Poisoned the oyster. It is such a brilliant inversion of victimhood.
The woman is initially defensive, but then she breaks down and admits the truth. She had just been in a massive, sweeping argument. In fact, she had quarreled with 19 different people that single day.
19 people in one day. The amount of adrenaline and cortisol pumping through her veins must have been astronomical. No wonder her stomach rejected the food.
Exactly. Shinn explains that the woman was so deeply inharmonious, so full of venom, anger, and conflict, that she literally drew to herself a negative physical experience.
Her internal turmoil magnetized the external poison.
The oyster was just the physical vehicle for the emotional toxicity she was already drowning in.
So, if we synthesize this vast, mind-bending journey we've been on with Florence Scovel Shinn, we started by realizing that the human mind is a three-part machine where the subconscious operates as a blind engine, faithfully executing whatever blueprints the conscious mind hands it.
We learned that we program this machine primarily through the vibratory force of our spoken words, meaning that our casual complaints and self-deprecating jokes are actually dangerous, literal commands.
We learned that to get what we truly need, we have to stop demanding specific, limited outcomes and instead trust the boundless divine selection.
We learned that faith requires physical action. We must dig our ditches and buy our blankets to prepare our nervous systems for the good we expect.
We learned that when faced with hostile opposition, the most powerful weapon is not a bigger shield, but complete non-resistance and the blessing of our enemies.
And finally, we learned that radical forgiveness is the ultimate superseding cure for the diseases of both the physical body and our external circumstances.
It is a complete hermetically sealed system for navigating reality. It takes the exhausting paradigm of life as a brutal, unpredictable battlefield and transforms it into a game of precise internal alignment. You aren't fighting external enemies. You are only ever managing your own internal state.
It places the locus of control entirely and heavily within the individual, which is both incredibly empowering and immensely demanding. Under these rules, you can no longer blame the economy or the rival salesman or the toxic boss or even the bad oyster.
You are the sole author of your experience, responsible for every word you speak and every image you allow your imagination to cut. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today, and we want to leave you, our learner, with the final provocative thought to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. In our modern culture, we spend an exorbitant amount of time and money curating our physical diets.
We obsessively read the labels on our food, we track our macros, we debate the merits of organic versus non-organic produce. We fiercely protect what goes into our stomachs.
But how much time do we spend curating our verbal and mental diets?
It's the most vital question you can ask yourself. If your subconscious mind is indeed a flawless eavesdropper, a tireless, literal worker taking meticulous notes on every sarcastic joke you make, every complaint you utter in a venting session with a friend, and every anxious scenario you rehearse in traffic today. What physical reality is it silently building for you to wake up to tomorrow?
Are you handing it the blueprint for a trunk or the blueprint for a mansion? Are you poisoning the oyster with your resentment, or are you digging ditches for your own prosperity?
Life is absolutely not a battle.
It's a game, and we challenge you to try playing it by Florence Scovel Shinn's rules for just a few days, just to see what happens when you drop the armor. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Guard your words, follow your calmest hunches, and expect the absolute best.